Hello, so today I'll be talking about my experiences as an emergency medical technician for my Experiences of Healthcare project. So I just want to start out with a quick HIPAA notice. These stories don't include any personal identifying information. I'm just repeating my field notes, which I had to take, and I'm upholding HIPAA in disclosing these stories. So I just want to start out with a little bit of background. I live in Massapequa Park on Long Island, and I became an EMT over the summer. I live in a predominantly white neighborhood. There's really bad redlining on Long Island. Clinicals are in Brooklyn at Interfaith Hospital in Crown Heights, which is like right here, and Brooklyn Hospital Center, which is in downtown Brooklyn, which is right here. So moving forward into the EMT education with respect to the medical gaze, emergency medicine is a very fast-paced environment. We have to gather a lot of information really quickly. We have to make quick decisions and be as informed as possible. We have to ask a lot of patients about their medical status, including like a sample history, which is signs, symptoms, allergies, medications, past medical history, last oral intake, events leading up to, and then OPQRST for medical patients, which is onset, provocation, quality, radiation, severity, and time. And so I wanted to include this quote here from the Davenport article, Learning to See, that says, over the course of the 18th century, the question that the doctor asked the patient was transformed from what's the matter with you to where does it hurt? This notion of the gaze seeing a case or a condition rather than a human being has become a dominant paradigm in the critiques of modern medicine. I definitely see this within emergency medicine just because of the nature of how quick it is, and also it's very difficult to build rapport with patients. We just drop them off at the emergency room. We don't get to follow up or find out what ends up happening, which I really hate. And I also do really think that it enables the medical gaze in dehumanizing the patient, because we don't have to build a relationship with them. We don't have to continue treatment after we drop them off at the hospital. I don't like that aspect. Okay, so moving forward into my instructor, she was great. She was a lawyer. She was a New York City cop for 29 years, a paramedic with the NYPD. She's been teaching students for 27 years. She was awesome. Very knowledgeable, great teacher. Like, she taught us real world stuff. And so I have these quotes here from Davenport. I'm going to start with this one over here on the left. While you're teaching technical, you're also teaching the interpersonal. I'm demonstrating the interpersonal skills while I'm showing the technical skills, and at the same time I'm saying blah, blah, blah. When I read this, I definitely saw a relationship to Karen. She would teach us bedside manner, and she would teach us how to really respect patients while also teaching us the technical skills, like little things to make patients more comfortable, like asking which arm they prefer for blood pressure, small things like that. She was really big on respecting patients no matter what they are, no matter what. And then she was really, like, she would set us straight when we'd crack jokes at, like, the CPR dummies even. Like, she was just all about respecting patients and building trust with patients, letting them know, like, you're on their side, and that you're here to help. She was really big on that. And then so I have another quote from the Davenport article over here that says, witnessing is the indigenous term clinic volunteers used to describe the action of attentive listening to the people who go here for help. It entails respectful focus on the entirety of a person's life situation, not merely on their ailment. It implies treating each person who walks into the clinic as an individual, not a representative of class. This definitely resonates a lot with what Karen would teach us. She would always say, whether or not you're homeless or whether or not you're the president, you're getting the same treatment from me. And she made that very abundantly clear that we were to respect all patients no matter what, and how to really, get have them trust you and work with you. So yeah, I saw a lot of parallel with what the medical educators were doing for their students in the medical gaze. So biomedicalization and emergency medical services. So we have private ambulance companies. I don't work for a specific hospital. I work for a company that works with the hospital. So you work for like Senior Care or like North Shore Ambulance Company or something like that. So I work with Senior Care. I'll be working with them over the summer in the Bronx doing transport. So yeah, and then fire department, New York police department, and local emergency services all have their own ambulances. Like public sectors have their own ambulances, like the county and stuff like that. And so this leans into the commodification of healthcare, the extension of medical jurisdiction over health itself, in addition to illness, disease, and injury, and the commodification of healthcare are fundamental to biomedicalization. So yeah, I think that the use of private ambulance companies definitely plays into the commodification of healthcare, and you don't really have a choice as to what ambulance is coming to you when you get dispatched when you are having an emergency. So there's a lot of emphasis on technology within biomedicalization. There is also a huge reliance on technology in emergency medicine. So tech in the ED, like on the bus, has gotten so advanced that I could take a 12-lead EKG and send it to the ER doctor to read. The mechanical CPR pumps I think are super cool. I put a photo here so you can see the wrists get strapped in up here to kind of stabilize the body. It's like this ring device that goes around, and then this does the compressions, while you can see the EMT up here is BVMing, is bagging the patient. Sorry, I don't know how to not use this in like medical jargon. Is bagging the patient pretty much, doing assisted respirations. I think that this machine is super cool. And so I just have a quote here from Clark that says, biomedicalization is our term for the increasingly complex, multi-sided, multi-directional processes of medicalization that today are being both extended and reconstituted through the emergent social forms of practices of a highly and increasingly techno-specific biomedicine. So yeah, also the computerization in the patient care reports was relevant in terms of biomedicalization. The computerization and database of these patients is very helpful in connecting with the hospital. We can't see anything about the patient unless they've been treated before by this hospital and are already in the system. The computerization is pretty standard. It gets sent to the hospital and stored in the company's database. So working in Brooklyn, these are just some experiences that I've had. So I want to just go over some geography. So down up here, you can see I just have a map of the different neighborhoods within Brooklyn, and then down here I have a map that shows crime, danger by area. So the darker blue is associated with a more dangerous area. So you can see this is where Interfaith is, and this is where Brooklyn Hospital is. Not great areas. They're definitely in the more crime-ridden areas, and there's definitely a relationship here between class and crime. So in these areas are typically lower income. I get a lot of calls from East New York, which you can see it's a very dangerous neighborhood. But then when you look right next door to Canarsie is low, has a much lower crime rate, and it's a predominantly white neighborhood. And then when you move over here to Diker Heights, you can also see it's very safe, which is another predominantly white neighborhood. So these areas are predominantly Black and low income areas. And so the wealthy white neighborhoods are associated with lower crime rates. So demography and prophylaxis. So there were poor living conditions, many of those in the projects, mainly Black individuals. A lot of them, there were a lot of disabled and elderly people that also lived in these horrible conditions, which I thought was very, very alarming. I mean, specifically if, you know, they're in a building that doesn't have a good elevator and you have to take the stairs up 15 floors, like that is the case in some of these buildings. And so the rundown buildings, like the projects, the smells, it was pretty bad. The streets were dirty. There were a lot of homeless people walking around and people drugged out of their minds. I wrote here, walking on the sidewalk. We would get yelled at pretty regularly just by random people on the side of the road. It was something. And so I have another quote here from Thrasher that says, because racism and colonialism spread disease around the world, created living conditions for Black and Indigenous people in which disease spread, devalued Black lives such that illness wasn't treated or prevented, white settlers and later white Americans associated with Blackness and their own health with distance of it. So yeah, I want to emphasize created living conditions for Black and Indigenous people in which disease spread and devalued Black lives such that illness wasn't treated or prevented. I think in regards to the disabled patients, I think that it definitely is devaluation of Black lives that isn't treated. And these living conditions, they facilitate the spread of disease. Absolutely. They're very, very close quarters. They're not very clean. And it's a lot of people coming from a lot of different areas in these, you know, low-income housing projects. So yeah. So again, with demography and prophylaxis, I just have these two other quotes from Thrasher, and this one is just pointing out that viral vulnerability is manufactured in the way that that trans undocumented people or both locks people out of the formal economy and keeps them from accessing safe housing and work. I won't elaborate there because it's long. And then this one on the right here that talks about the percentage of homeless people. About 2/3 of the homeless population in America are Black, despite them only making up for 12% of the population. Just goes to show, again, discrepancies in between demography and prophylaxis. These people don't have the same kind of, resources and availability to like prophylaxis, like preventative medicine and vaccines and such. And so they just kind of get stuck in this perpetuated cycle of poverty and disease. Okay, so my measles intox case. This was a fun one. Not a fun one. Oh my god. Sorry. Okay, so here was the case. Also intox is just an abbreviation for intoxicated, and it's what we use when we get called for drunk patients, pretty much. So we got called for an intox, at a migrant shelter for an older male patient. He had measles. I speculate that he was unvaccinated due to the strength of the measles vaccine. He was an Albanian immigrant and didn't speak much English. I don't remember how we deduced that he was Albanian. I think he had his passport, actually. And so, yeah, he kept calling me doctor. You hear measles and you put on 2 pairs of gloves and 2 masks and you try and stay an arm's length away. But yeah, and so I want to highlight the issues here. So the potential for outbreak, measles is highly contagious, especially in an area like a migrant shelter. In a building like migrant shelter that has a mixed bag vaccination status. People are coming from all over. And you don't know, what people have had access to. And so this is kind of similar to the way that COVID spreads through infrastructure, like the nursing homes. So, for example, in New York, when COVID hit and people were placed in the nursing homes, and everybody it just spread rampantly through the nursing homes. and has had, you know, a really devastating impact on the people living there. I think that the same could be shown here for measles in the infrastructure that he was in, especially if they were children in the migrant shelter that hadn't received a vaccination. Those are very susceptible. They're very susceptible to measles, and measles is highly contagious. I can't I can't speak on his documentation status in regards to the viral underclass. I can't speculate on something like that, but he was at a migrant shelter, so that maybe points that he was unable to find housing or just struggling generally. Yeah. Okay, the DOA to Empanada pipeline. This is another very just interesting situation. So in talking to paramedics, they have a lot of horror stories, like a lot of really just, devastating calls that they've answered, especially in working for a couple of years. You see some difficult things to witness. So there's kind of like a psych check-in for EMTs, like following a really traumatic event. But it's just like a safe space. Like, it's not counseling. It's kind of just making sure that everyone is still able to function. It just kind of provides like a sense of community. And so in regards to my DOA to Empanada story, it was my first call of my 7 a.m. rotation. It was a cardiac arrest, so we were going lights and sirens. We were there in under 5 minutes. The patient ended up being a DOA, which stands for dead on arrival. The fire department had gotten there before us, and they told us it was a DOA. So the head medics that I was working with went inside, checked it out, and then came back to me, looked at me, and asked, "Have you ever seen a dead body before?" And I said no. And they said, "Okay, let's go." And they took me inside and had me, observe the patient, had me checking for signs of death, and observing. It was like a model for like experimentation, kind of being like, okay, and do you notice that his jaw is stiff, and do you notice that his eyes are rolled back, and that there's sputum coming from the mouth? Stuff like that, just verbalizing all of this while the man's brother was down the hall grieving. And that was a very kind of troubling experience for me, how they just kind of showed disregard for the fact that this was a human being less than 12 hours ago. He had been dead for a few hours at that point. Rigor mortis had actually, not rigor mortis, but he was stiff and really cold. Sorry, I'm going a little too in depth. But it was very nonchalant, like while everyone was grieving, while the brother was grieving. And I just thought it was very strange. And that was definitely the medical gaze was so prevalent there. They viewed him as a set of symptoms instead of a human being. They didn't look at the whole story. They just looked at, these are the signs of death. We looked around for anything like drugs or alcohol or anything. There were no visible deformities. We found nothing indicating cause of death. So police came and we were able to leave. And then they said, "Do you want to go get empanadas?" We went and got empanadas, sat at the pier, didn't even talk about it. It was nothing. It was crazy. The medical gaze it was really apparent here. I even put a photo of myself. I took a photo eating the empanada, and I was like, wow, this is tough. This is a tough field. And so I kind of understand the desensitization, I don't know if I said that right, that EMTs, do, because this is a lot to deal with, especially if you're working this pretty regularly. Things like this can have a tough impact on your psyche. And so, yeah, that was a crazy pipeline, but I definitely think the medical gaze here was very prevalent. Insurance. So I've had patients say to not take them to the hospital because of their immigration status and insurance status. They would say things like, my insurance won't cover an ambulance, can I take an Uber? People have legitimately asked this multiple times. Unfortunately, it's upsetting to hear. And so we have the Congress No Surprises Act, which was enacted. It's a federal law that restricts surprise medical bills in certain instances. This sounds great. This sounds like it would be really helpful in emergency medicine, but for some reason, only air ambulance is covered, not ground transportation. So if we were to helicopter you, that would be covered, but not for the bus. Whatever. So yeah, and so I have a quote here from Clark in Biomedicalization that talks about, at the same time, there's a dramatic increase in stratifying fee-for-fee service options for those who can afford them. The most common and affordable alternatives are choosing high-end providers through such insurance plan. Here providers whom to pay a higher commission, which are more available and may have better reputations. Some plans offer high-end hospital options. You pay more to go to certain better hospitals. This is a crazy concept. It's the complete opposite of what I dealt with. I dealt with patients, being asked to not take the ambulance because it wouldn't be covered by their insurance. And then here we see the example that the wealthy people are able to pick and choose better hospitals to go to. And I just think that the gap here and the juxtaposition here is very prevalent in the commodification and stratification of healthcare in regards to biomedicalization. We would have to sit there and make sure that some hospitals were in network, which would sometimes delay transport time. So it's a lot of moving pieces, and a lot of, things that patients have to worry about. And so I just wanted to put the medical industrial complex here. I think that emergency medicine would probably fall somewhere in here. But yeah, in seeing the way that all these things work together, it just kind of highlights further disparities, within the healthcare system, and especially in emergency medical services in regards to access and things like that. And so here's my conclusion. It is by entering the asylums where poverty and the sickness languish together that the medical student, will feel those painful emotions, that active commiseration, that burning desire to bring comfort and consolation. It is there that he will learn to be religious, humane, and compassionate, which is from Foucault, which is mentioned in Davenport. So I just want to take this section to kind of acknowledge my privilege. I'm very grateful and privileged to be able to work in this sector and to be in a place where these are my observations. This is that I'm doing something to help, and as opposed to, this being my lived reality. I'm very, very, very lucky to be able to do that and to, help these people that are struggling based on the system. And so yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I know I definitely took a different approach here, but yeah, it's one thing to read about things like this, read about these disparities, but it's another thing to really see it in person and see the way that it manifests and see these sick patients and the deplorable conditions that they really do live in, and just the stratification and commodification of healthcare within. So yeah, thank you.